This week, we have a real gem. Not another zirconium movie, but a true classic. Well, not quite well known enough these days to be a classic, maybe, but a great movie. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter is a beautiful, poignant, G-rated, very literary movie. Of course, it's an adaptation of a book by Carson McCullers, and I haven't read the book, but I suspect it's good. I love the title of the movie and the book. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. That's exactly what the movie is about. The title is kind of all you need to know. Do I even need to make a video on this movie? Well, if I didn't make a weekly video, poof, I would disappear. So here we are. I think I do have a few interesting things to tell you, such as what does that even mean? The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. This movie follows a deaf mute named John Singer. He's got a slightly ironic name, I suppose. We'll talk a lot about silence and communication in a moment. Singer is played by a young Alan Arkin. He looks slightly like Pete Buttigieg. It's obvious from the beginning, really, that this is a literary adaptation, and one of the big reasons is because it doesn't have one clear Hollywood plotline. Instead, we kind of just follow Singer around as he moves to a new town, rents a room from a family who will be a big part of the story, and bumps into some random people, just lives his life, etc. This is a Southern story. It gets a great score on Southern Movie Bingo. There's a carnival, a dinner, a riverbank for hot summers. The riverbank, it reminds me some of the one in Badlands. They've also got the same house, seemingly, that appears in Scarecrow. Got videos about both of those, of course. Neither one of these locations is actually very close to where this movie is set. Personally, of course, I count Staten Island as the southern United States. Of course, we also have the biggest southern trope of them all in this movie, which is racism, and we'll come back to that in a second. I think the book has been described as Southern Gothic. We've covered a couple other Southern Gothic movies on the channel. Southern Gothic movies, they always seem to be adaptations of a book. Reflections in a Golden Eye and Wise Blood come to mind. Those movies are a lot more grotesque than this one. Is that a hallmark of Southern Gothic? It's grotesque? I'm not sure. A comparison that might be more apt is The Last Picture Show. That's more bleak, but in some ways kind of similar. This movie is it's the opposite of grotesque, really. For one thing, it's very economical. What do I mean by that? We get a lot of meaning out of some really simple stuff here. We have a great opening scene, for instance, of a man breaking into a bakery to steal some cookies. He also swipes the topper from a wedding cake, perhaps a little bit of poignant foreshadowing. He doesn't react at all when the police car drives up behind him. Why not? Well, once his friend, John Singer, shows up and they start conversing in sign language, you realize what's going on. Very economical. Some people might find this first character, his name is Spyros, to be a little dated, but I like how quickly the movie sets up some poignant relationships. I think this is one of the best openings I've seen in a long time. When the credits come in after this prologue, you have a profound sense of what is to come and what's going on up here for Singer, what his life is kind of about. There is more going on at this point in this movie than there are at the end of a lot of movies. It's hard to explain exactly, but The Heart is a Lonely Hunter operates in a very particular dramatic space. This is one of the most interesting things about it, really, is that it has a distinct dramatic logic. It just feels different from most movies. A lot of this comes from how the communication works, of course, and we'll get to that in a second. But part of it is also how it balances naturalism with something more poetic. This is part of the literary feel, and I guess a lot of literary adaptations can feel like this. We've also got a lot of vivid characters like Spyros, or a drunk that Singer meets in a diner. These are realistic characters, but also a little larger than life. Some of the most important characters in the movie are the family that Singer rooms with. The daughter, Mick, is the main player here. That's another square in Southern Bingo, by the way. Everybody has a goofy nickname, Mick, and her younger brother, Bubba. Mick is played by Sandra Locke. Very interesting individual. Locke sort of famously lied about her age for her entire career, more or less. She was married to a gay man for 51 years, sort of a marriage of convenience or something, but she was with Clint Eastwood for quite a while. She didn't have her death publicly reported, and also her name is actually Sandra, not Sandra. Some people are a little vindictive about all this stuff, especially the age thing, which was somewhat significant in the production of this movie. I think it's all kind of amusing. To me, Sandra Locke is not a high point in the movie, though, to be honest. She was nominated for an Academy Award for this movie. I didn't think it was the greatest performance, but she does have some good lines. I really like her dad in the movie. He's got an aura, not to be confused with Honora. We don't have a lot of stars in the movie, really. Cecily Tyson would go on to have a pretty good career. She's in Sounder, which I have a video about, I think. I think it helps this movie not to have too many recognizable people in it. A lot of real-looking people. I was surprised how compelling the family subplot is in this movie, and really how compelling all of the subplots are in the film. You almost expect the movie to spread itself a little too thin, but every storyline is strong, even if we don't quite tie up all the loose ends. Before we get much deeper, I'll say that this is also a really nicely rendered movie. It was directed by Robert Ellis Miller. Honestly, I have no idea who that is. If you know, let me know. Cinematography from James Wong Howe. Cool guy, definitely know who this is. Born in China in 1899, but grew up in Pasco, Washington. He was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, won 2 of them, for Rose Tattoo. I think I've seen that movie, Anna Magnani, and HUD. I think I've seen the first 10 minutes of that movie. I was thinking about bringing it to the channel someday. Anyway, great career from James Wong Howe, and he does really cool stuff here. One of the things that stood out to me was how the house is photographed in the movie. This is the house that Singer and Mick are living in. In 1968, a lot of people were still filming houses like their theatrical sets up on some stage, right? But not James. We have something really three-dimensional going on here. Lots of fluid movements around this property. For instance, there's scenes where we see Mick down in the yard, and then the camera will tilt up a bit to show Singer looking out the window of his room, which is on the top floor. Then we've got a great reverse shot where we jump right inside of the room. Good logic of the space. Great use of windows in this movie. Mick is arguing with her father at one point. Then she runs out of the room, and you can see, very same shot, out through the window, her running onto the porch and then like slamming herself down onto the wicker like bench on the porch. Mick's younger brother, Bubba, likes to look through the windows. We've got a great crane shot from this porch in the front up to Singer's window. Lots of nice stuff here. I also think the music is cool in this movie. There's a lot of silence in the film, which is fitting. I think the opening scene is almost entirely without a score, but when the music comes in, it makes an impact. It's a harpsichord that leads the way in this score, and there was a little bit of a moment in the late 1960s of these slightly more medieval scores. Something like Up the Down Staircase comes to mind. Of course, I've got a video about that one, too. Nice movie. Anyway, let's get to the big stuff. Probably the first thing to comment on, the most obvious thing in this movie, is how the movie can work with a main character who can't hear anything and can't say anything. Imagine if this YouTube channel was like that. It'd be a lot better, I know. It's not just that the movie is overcoming a limitation, but these parameters actually seem to really help it express something deep and help it feel not like most movies. Let's start with the practical side of things here. There's a lot of silence in the movie. Early on, we see a number of conversations between Singer and Spyros, and we're not privy to them. We don't really know what's happening unless you know sign language. There are no subtitles for this part. Sometimes you might be able to guess what they're saying, but most of the time, not really. In the movie, it makes no attempt to tell you. This is kind of refreshing. It's kind of exciting for a cinephile because not a lot of movies work like this. I guess sometimes a film will feature another language. It takes a brave director to feature dialogue that the audience can't understand. But you know what? It's almost always good, right? It is almost always a sign of sophistication when a movie gives you something that you cannot understand. There's only 3 people in the movie who actually sign. One of them was a real deaf guy, Horace Oates Jr. Don't try to find him in any other movies because I don't think you will. Most of the conversations in the film are between Singer and someone who can speak and hear. He does a lot of lip reading in the movie. I'm not entirely sure how realistic it is, but they do give him a number of moments where he can't quite understand what they're saying. He asks them to do it again or something. And we've got a lot of nice kind of mechanics, almost a little comedic when Singer, can hear someone or can't or something like that. Sometimes he doesn't want to listen to someone, so he'll turn away so he can't see them. Some of the characters understand how it works. Some of them don't. Some of them don't even realize that he's deaf. There's a lot of nice little moments, again, almost like jokes, where One example is Singer and Spyros trying to do something quietly at one point, but it's loud, right? Or, hey, they're standing right next to something very loud, but they don't notice it like everyone else would. Singer doesn't hear people approaching him. Sometimes he's a little bit startled when they appear right next to him. Stuff like that. Lots of good, not really overbearing, but lots of nice little moments throughout the film. There was a little bit of drama in Singer's condition, I would say, just inherently in his life or whatever. You constantly are wondering, how's he going to communicate? How's he going to do this? How's he going to handle this situation? What's this going to be like? Often he creates a little bit of drama just by showing up. You can tell you've got a strong character in a movie when just by walking into the room, they make you wonder what's going to happen. They create some drama. We get the same trick a number of times in this movie where something significant will happen in a subplot and a character will be feeling a lot of emotion, maybe Mick, and then Singer will just walk into the room. And it's like, oh man, okay, the stage has been set. Let's do it, right? Kind of cool. Most of the conversations that Singer is involved in go one way, as you might imagine. The other person does most of the talking. There's almost a confessional feel to it sometimes. Well, if I'm going to have a conversation with you, I got to tell you some stuff. It reminds me a little bit of the movie Yi, where a number of characters confide in the bedridden grandmother. One of the characters here tells Singer that nobody has ever listened to him as well. Nice piece of irony. Occasionally, Singer will write something down, draw a picture, do something to communicate in the other direction. Mostly, he responds with gestures or expressions. And this is really the highlight of an incredible performance from Alan Arkin, who is really remarkably expressive. One thing that struck me about his gestures, I guess it kind of seems like his gestures have a little bit of a southern accent. What do I mean? Well, there's a lot of times where he's saying something that's actually relatively simple. Yes, no. What about you? And I could come up with a gesture for most of these things. You could too, probably. But the way that Alan Arkin does it feels so connected to the character and to the time and place. It's like he's, nodding in a southern accent. Anyway, I have to admit, I was reminded a little bit of Gromit while watching the movie, another very expressive character. An interesting thing about Singer is that he's able to cross a lot of social boundaries in the film. He's nice to people, and he's a little bit vulnerable. So people are, for the most part, nice to him. Maybe behind his back, they're going to call him a dummy or something like that, but people are surprisingly open to him. He's able to connect with just about everybody in the movie. He's able to cross the boundaries of segregation. He befriends a drunk that nobody else wants to talk to. And of course, he can connect with a teenage girl. Interesting. That's a lot of range, especially for somebody who can't speak or hear. Singer also seems to have a fair amount of free time. There's another kind of interesting thing about his role. He gets a job. He's like a jeweler or something. We never actually see him working the job. We do in the very beginning, but after he moved, we never see him go to work, which I think is possibly a limitation. Maybe he wasn't going to work, but presumably is because he has some money. Anyway, that part's a little bit fuzzy. But beyond his professional commitments or whatever, he kind of has a lot of spare time. He finds a place to stay. He finds a place to eat. And then he's kind of got everything checked off. He doesn't seem to face the same deluge of daily obligations that, you and I do, like getting out these dumb videos every week. Maybe in part it was just because this was a different time. And, there's not a lot going on in this town, but you also get the sense that a lot of things in life are kind of closed off to Singer, unfortunately. There's moments in this movie where he kind of simply just seems bored. There's also moments where he's lonely. As good a listener as Singer is, it's hard for him to be heard. I think one of the reasons why silence works so well in this movie is because the heart is silent. Or at least the story of the heart isn't really one of words. You could make a case that Singer himself represents a heart. It's some sort of reverse metonymy. Totem pro parte, I believe you could call that, something like that. Anyway, poignant character, and him not speaking, does a lot in this movie. Another aspect of the film are the racial divides in the South. The book is set in the 1930s, I think, but the movie fast forward a little bit to the 1960s. They couldn't find enough old cars or something, didn't have the budget for it. In some ways, those decades don't actually seem that different. The Heart is a lonely hunter, has a lot of different focuses, a lot of different subplots. This isn't a movie like The Intruder, see my video about it, which is focused entirely on race relations, but hey, it gets the message across, believe me. This movie is rated G, but it has some grim moments. Maybe the most impactful thing is something really simple. There's a black doctor in this movie, one of the main characters in one of the subplots, and at one point he goes to the courthouse to see a judge. The sheriff tells him to wait, and he sits there all day waiting. At the end of the day, the sheriff says, oh, well, the judge went home an hour ago, and he laughs at him, right? This is much less significant than some of the other things that happen in the movie, but the smugness and the disrespect is powerful. There's a political angle in the movie, of course, but there's also an emotional component that's maybe more striking in some ways. In some ways, all of the characters here, all the subplots, feature vulnerable people. They're not all going through the same thing, but they're all feeling some kind of isolation, without a doubt. And for all of them, it's something that touches the heart. With segregation, part of the story is exclusion from white society. But you also see in this movie how things are complicated within, one family, right? The doctor and his family are often at odds with each other about how to be in the world, just about how to go about their lives in, this extremely exclusionary society. This is probably most of what I have to say about The Heart. Is a lonely hunter, a profound movie, a poignant movie. Probably said that word a few times already. In some ways, most of what you need is on the page here. I don't feel like I have to dig super deep into this movie, but let me leave you with a couple great quotes that probably come straight out of the book. There's a lovely moment where Mick realizes for the first time that Singer is lonely, and she asks him about it. Tells him, I never really thought that other people would feel lonely. Later, Mick is talking to someone, and she tells them that she spent her life not really being anything, just looking at a lot of pictures. A lot of nice lines. There's also some, just great, beautiful, moving moments in this movie. Some great details, like Mick using vanilla extract as perfume. We do teeter towards cliche a couple of times. Maybe some of the stuff about music is a little on the nose, for instance. But the movie mostly pulls back. For instance, Mick early on is in awe of one of her wealthy friends who's playing the piano. Later on, someone says, oh, she's terrible at playing the piano. There's a few different ways to interpret that turn of events, but this literary brand of subtlety is really strong in the movie. The characters and the stories, they twist away from the obvious and from your expectations. We meet this drunk, for instance, mentioned him already, and he's a nice guy, but also fleeting, not a Hollywood hero, just a guy. Not quite a real guy, but a guy from a book. Great character. I think you know what I mean. Anyway, like I said, this movie has a great title, and it lives up to that completely. Can't recommend enough. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter.